am I just going to start or?
Yep, I'll say a few words, inshallah. So,
Mhm.
um, hold on. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us. It's really great to have you as a speaker, and really excited to hear the topic about, the different tips for success and leadership as well. Just doing a quick introduction as well. So Ibrahim Khalil was an alumni from Amity College, and he is currently a student leadership coordinator and science teacher um, in chemistry in Amity College. He's a studies of religion coordinator and involved in youth college as a teacher from ISRA, and he studied and graduated from Bachelor of Science and majoring in Physiology and Neuroscience and Masters in Teaching Maths and Science in Secondary Education from UTS. So thank you so much for joining us, and we would love to hear what you have to share with us today.
Thank you very much, Safia, and thank you, Saga, for organizing um, this event in getting different alumni together to be able to talk about ways that we can benefit each other so we can grow as a community. I think that's really important. Yeah, so and thank you as well for that introduction. Now, I just wanted to start off a bit with the meaning behind the name. I think there might have been a bit of confusion of what it means, but I think breaking it down will really help us understand what I'm trying to get to in this session. And so the name Flying in the Wake of Greatness is really inspired from something that we see in nature. And as a science teacher, I'm always thinking about how we can learn from the world around us and how I can pass that on to my students. And we've probably heard of this before, that birds, they fly in a V formation. And the idea behind that formation is that the bird at the front does most of the work. And because the bird at the front is doing a lot of the work, the birds at the back, they get less tired and they don't have to fly as hard as those at the front. And there was a study done by the Royal Veterinary College in the UK in which they attached sensors to birds and they saw that this was the trend. But they also noticed a few other things from this as well. And one of those things that they noticed was that the bird that's at the front is not always at the front. Sometimes it will move to the back to allow another bird to come to the front. And it's that cycle that allows birds to fly when they migrate very, very far distances. And down to the effect of first bird's the first bird's actions, that's really what I want to look into as well, just before I start on the principles. So the front bird, as it flaps its wings, it creates something called downwash. And this downwash is air being pushed down behind it. And in response to the air being pushed down behind it, the air behind, about a meter behind the bird and to the sides of the front bird, actually rises. And that's called upwash. And that upwash is what gives the birds lift. And lift is, the hardest thing about flying. It's why we have to attach, heavy fuel to rockets. It's why planes have to go down a runway to take off. And this upwash actually makes it very easy for the birds behind it to fly. And we talk about upwash a lot, and that's the whole reason why birds fly in a V formation. But we don't, sometimes we forget to talk about this downwash. That if the bird at the that so if the bird sees the leader and actually tries to go too close or gets in the wrong zone behind the leader, then actually that bird is actually pushed down, and that actually can send them out of the formation and they can not catch up until another formation comes along. And so how does this apply to us? I guess we're humans, we're not birds. So the idea is that when we see a leader, when we see someone that is on the path of success, we really can do one of two things. The first thing that we can do is we look at that person and we think, oh, this person started off, they had a really good starting point. I didn't have a similar starting point like that. Or, they're really skilled, they've worked really hard. I'm not able to work as hard as they are. And we can get pushed down. We can get caught in that leader's downwash. and we can get demotivated, which is a bit dangerous. It prevents us from achieving the things that we want to achieve. Or we can go a bit back, go a bit to the side, and actually, from what we see of that person that is successful, we can get caught in their upwash. And instead of having to do all of the hard work that they did by forging our own path or doing our own thing, we actually get to fly with them as well. And they make our lives easier as well. And I think this is something that's very important in modern times because we're exposed to so many people. So the idea is that when we need to be able to seek greatness and then recognize it and then apply it in our own life. So we seek greatness in that we see, okay, this person is a leader, recognize where we need to follow them. What are the things that we need to stay, that we need to learn from them? And then learn how to apply the skills or the principles that they apply, which actually do make them successful in our everyday lives. And that's what I'm going to be going over. And I think all of us in some way or form are leaders. We're either leaders in our community, or we're leaders in our homes, or we're leaders even for ourselves in leading ourselves in our own microcosm. And knowing that we are leaders is the first step into deciding that, okay, I'm going to better myself so I can lead myself, I can lead those around us. And we are in dire need of leaders rather than followers nowadays, which is why I'm interested in leadership at school. So just a bit of background as to why I'm giving this talk. I was asked to originally talk about the principles of success, but then I thought about it, and I wouldn't consider myself to be successful. And I think a lot of people don't consider themselves to be successful. They rather consider themselves to be on the path of success. And on the path of success, I think that what has helped me grow and what has helped me develop is being exposed to great leaders that have helped me become a better person, that have given me great examples as well. So who are some of these leaders and what exposure have I had through my life so far? The first leader is probably my grandfather, who's an Order of Australia Medal recipient for his work in establishing the Muslim community in Australia. Um, Many of my family members also established many different community organizations such as Interfaith Dialogue Projects, Australian Muslim Times newspapers, Muslim Women's Support Centres. And probably one of the biggest things within my family was we've been running the Multicultural Eid Festival and Fair for about the last, I think, less than 30 years. And so from a very, very young age, I have been exposed to these leaders and these great people. And from that, I think I've learned a lot of soft skills, which I'm starting to see the fruits of now, that I've been put into a position of leadership. And I'm starting to recognize, okay, this is actually what they were doing, even though I didn't realize it at the time. Now, when I look at them and now I can apply that myself, oh, that actually works. And the idea is behind this whole live session is that those principles or those skills that I've seen these leaders apply, I just want to share them with you. And those things that I've experienced, they're informed by my understanding of neuroscience from my bachelor's, and also it's informed a lot from my teaching in my teaching for my students. I think there's something different about having so many, 50 plus students in your care, in that you're really thinking about how to always make their lives better, how to always have a positive influence on them. And that really rewires you in a different way. It makes you always think about that. That's why I think in some way or form, everyone should be a teacher in some way and form. And all of the people that I've gained inspiration from that I'll be talking about today, actually at some point are, or at some level are teachers themselves. So the first principle that I wanted to cover, and I've tried to make these related to the title of the session, but they're a bit weak and they might be a bit cheesy. So I'll give a secondary analogy as well. The first one is to find and make launch pads. So if you want to fly, you need to set the places from which you're going to fly from. Another analogy for this would be to open up doors. And the only way you can open up doors is you need to open up, or we need to be able to open up avenues for us to find people. In the end, every single person has something valuable, something great inside of them. And initially, we don't have the light to be able to see what those valuable things are in us. But if you open up the windows, if you let light in from outside in the form of linking with others, then they can actually show you what it is about you that is valuable. And I see this all the time in the classroom. When you see a student might not think they are very valuable, or there might be a teacher that comes along and says, "Oh, you're actually pretty good at public speaking. That's something you should work on." Or you're actually pretty good at this science stuff. You should work on that. You should follow that dream. Or you're very passionate about this issue. Maybe that's something you can follow up. And all of these things, they shine a light on what is valuable inside. And the only way to do that, or the best way to do that from what I've seen, is to really expose yourself to as many different avenues as you can. The schooling system does this in its own way. In high school, students are exposed to all the different sciences, and like subjects like history and all of that. And in there, if it was ideal and every teacher was incredibly passionate and knew what they were talking about perfectly, then every student would have proper exposure to whatever path they could take. And then they could grab onto that and follow that to become whatever they want to become. But the idea is if you keep yourself in your own space, if you keep yourself in your own microcosm, then you won't be able to build those bridges and you won't be able to meet with these people. So what do? When we meet with people, we actually give them genuine attention because we want to open a door. We want to open a connection with someone. You also might go out and attend courses with like-minded people. It's one of the reasons why going to uni is very important. And of course, this takes work. The only doors that are easy to keep open are probably those that come with family. With family, they kind of see past your flaws, your mistakes, and they still keep that connection. They keep those doors open. And I don't want to make this sound like you have to be extroverted. You have to do whatever anyone says. You have to always go up to someone. The idea is that some relationships you'll give less attention, and some relationships you'll give more attention. And you might have opened some doors, and you realize, okay, maybe that's something I don't need as much right now. But the ideas and the main concept is that we don't close or especially slam doors. And that's what I've seen from individuals that are highly successful in my experience, is that they always leave these avenues open. Even if there was a relationship that they're not gaining anything from or that they're not focusing on, the door isn't closed, it's rather left ajar to be opened later on if they need to. And we have to think about how do we close doors? What can happen when we close doors? Um, if you shut someone down, if you're very rude to them, if you don't listen to them because you think, you have a perceived bias about them, that they won't accept what you're about to say or anything like that. And a really, really important one is if you humiliate someone in front of someone else, then that's a big way of closing a door. And I see that all the time, with students. If you humiliate a student in front of the class, then that relationship that you have is broken. You cannot build it back up. Whereas if you were to take them aside and discuss in a respectful way, you would still get the outcome that you want in that they know, okay, I did something wrong. But then that relationship is kept open, and then when they need help, they can come to you as well. And that's a big thing about being a teacher. You always want to be accessible to your students. And some of the best teachers, and when I've talked to students who've reflected on the best teachers that they've had, those teachers really treated them like human beings, and they kept that connection always open. And what I've seen is that by keeping those connections open, when you have a need, then that door might open and a person might come to you to fulfill that need. And that's in itself very important. But these relationships don't and shouldn't only be superficial. And this is something that I'd like to emphasize, especially nowadays, that some of these relationships need to be very, very deep. Instead of just doors, they need to be ropes that we hold on to. These are the strong relationships that we build. So when we fail, which we ultimately will do, we have someone that can catch us, someone that we can reach out to, and we know 100% that they will support us. This is things like when your mental health deteriorates, when you feel like everything is falling out around you. And this is why craving relationships, having deeper relationships is something that we crave all the time. And this is why keeping strong relationships with your family is very, very important, because they already have that connection to you, and all you can do is build that back up, and they will be there for you when you need it the most. And these deep relationships are those that you can really rely on, and there are different literature that you can read based on how to build that up. There's a book by Stephen Mansfield on building your band of brothers. It's more catered towards men, but I found it very useful into how to build very deep, strong relationships. And this is what you see in people that are successful in that. When they do fall, they have someone that they can hold on to. And we've probably seen it in when we were in school, that the kids or the students that get up and they put themselves out there and they try out different things, those are the students that the teachers love, but it's also the students that the other students sometimes love as well. And why are they able to do that? Why are they able to go out and do it? It's because they have friends, or they have a support network that if they fail, okay, so what? I have someone that, I'm still respected in the class. I haven't lost respect. So if we have people that we know truly value us for who we are, then we can not be afraid to put ourselves out there. And that's something that we should work on as well. And we should diversify who it is. You might have someone that you turn to for family problems, work problems, and motivational problems and things like that. And I can go into more of this later, but I just want to go through all the principles before we talk about how to build some deep relationships as well. The second one links to what I talked about as well, is to try to fly and to be okay with falling. This is something that I see all the time in the classroom, that there are students that are afraid to ask a question because they think that their peers would turn them down, or their peers would think, oh, this guy's trying to be too smart or something like that. And I actually during uni, when I was writing a paper on this, there's actually this perceived bias that students have, in that they think that other students don't want them to get up and talk about or answer a question and things like that. They think they'll be called nerdy and things like that. But actually, when they did that study, they found out that the other students don't really care. They don't mind if student A was to get up and to answer the question at all. So it's just really this internal mechanism that prevents some of these students from wanting to go out there and put themselves out the line, in which it doesn't even matter if they do. And what I've seen with many people that have built, big organizations and, have done some great things, it's that they really consider everything that someone would ask them to do. And this isn't about, being a yes man. I'm not saying, you have to say yes to everything that is given to you. But the idea is that if someone asks you to do something, and it is within your means to do it, your automatic answer should be yes. And then to think about, okay, so let's say you've been asked to give a speech, or let's say you've been asked to deliver this thing for SAGA. So you think in your mind, okay, yes, I can do that. I want to do that. I want to be able to contribute in some way. But then let's say you have responsibilities that are a bit more important, that have a bit more of a priority at that time. And if doing that thing impedes on those responsibilities, then you can politely decline. But still, never close that door. Then that's really the big thing, because someone coming out to ask you to do something shows that they have some trust and they believe that you are responsible enough to do that. So they value you in some way. They've opened up a light and shone something of value within you. So in responding to that, you leave that door open so that maybe later on that avenue can become something that grows. And we've seen this in our organization at ISRA, where ISRA is not a big organization, but what happens and what I've seen all the time is relationships that the individuals at ISRA have built have allowed them to, whenever they have a need, that people will come streaming in to try and fill that need, because these individuals have given whatever they can whenever they could to those individuals that come when they need help. Okay, so we've established now youth college at Amity College, in which we're training, we're running Saturday classes for boys and girls in Prestons and Auburn. And we needed teachers. And when we needed teachers, we said, okay, there's this need. And the teachers started coming. And as the teachers started coming, the students started coming. And because of that, because of the relationships that we built, they were able to come. Same thing in my job with studies of religion. Whenever you need someone to deliver a talk, or you need people to train on how to deliver these talks, they come because of the relationships that you've built. And this is a really important point, that whenever you're asked to do something, to always consider it. You don't have to do it, but just to consider it and put yourself out there. And you can do that. You can feel comfortable doing that because you can feel comfortable doing that if you have a very strong support network. It works off each other. If let's say you are asked to do something and you completely fail at it, if you can go home and there's someone at home that really cares about you, or someone that really respects you, or a friend that really values you, then okay, so what? This is just one thing that I wasn't able to do. It doesn't get you down. You're able to get back up again. And this links to research done in neuroscience as well, on neuroplasticity, in that our brain is always forming connections. And even more recent research has shown that even at later ages, these connections can always still be built. So, but the only way those connections get built is if there is firing upstream and downstream from that connection. So if you're not exercising your ability to try things out, or your ability to get out there, or your ability to be in the community, or whatever you're working towards, then you won't be able to build those connections. And in the end, the brain is what drives us. If our brain is sluggish, if our connections aren't strong, we won't be able to do the great things that we can always do. That's another thing that I always see many of the inspiring people that I've been with, in that they're always learning. They're always trying to make themselves better. They're always working on themselves. Stephen Covey calls it sharpening the saw, for when you need to do the work that you need to do. If your brain isn't sharp, then when you need to do the work, you won't do it properly. If the saw isn't sharp when you need to cut the wood, then you'll spend 10 times the time that it would originally take with a sharp saw. But it's also important to recognize our responsibility as well in doing this. Some people fall on the other spectrum, that when they're asked to do something, and the reason why they say no is because they really want to get it perfect, or they don't want to try anything unless they can get it perfect. But we need to think about our limits, and we need to think about what the deliverables are, what the expectations are when we agree to anything, and what our responsibility is. And if we definitely cannot meet that responsibility on the expectations, then we should figure out how we can meet those expectations. And if there is no way to find it in between, then okay, politely decline and say, okay, maybe this is not the best time for me to be doing this. Dan Charnas, he writes a book called Organizing Your Life According to Chef's Principles. It talks about the mise en place, which is a place where the head chef stands in the kitchen, and from there they organize everything around them. And one of the concepts he talks about in that book is he asks the question, he says, do you think every dish that a chef puts out is completely perfect? And if you know any chefs, and I asked actually a few people that I know that have worked in kitchens, and they would say no, definitely not. They might mess up this ingredient, or they might have forgotten this, or something like that. But if that chef is poring over how to make that dish perfect, and it's not put out to be eaten, then there is no way for them to be able to receive feedback. And in the end, that feedback for them is more valuable than any perfect dish that they could have put out, because that feedback is what allows them to make the next dish better. And so in the same way, so if we're not putting ourselves out there to get that feedback, then we can't really build ourselves, and we can't make ourselves better either. And I see this myself, when I'm teaching a class, you prepare for a lesson, especially in science. Sometimes you're preparing a practical, you want it to be perfect. You don't want to make these mistakes and things like that. And you're preparing a lesson, and then the bell rings. And when the bell rings, you have to be out there. If you're not in that class as a teacher, then you're neglecting your other responsibilities that you need to have. That means your duty of care is being neglected. So in the end, you just gotta, okay, that's the lesson done. Go out and deliver it, and then get the feedback. And because of that feedback, you can deliver a better lesson as well. The third one is to think deeply and regularly. This is something that is so important, especially nowadays. This idea of reflection. Without being able to think deeply about a topic, we aren't able to receive that inspiration, or we aren't able to recognize what is valuable with us as well. The idea is to really just remove any distractions, close your eyes, and really analyze, self-account for yourself. Criticize, how could I have done this better? What other opportunities could I have had? You could do like a SWOT analysis of that as well. But what we also need to be doing is settling our mind. When we have our phones, when we're exposed to things all the time, if our mind doesn't get time to settle, then it gets too cluttered, and we're not able to prioritize what is important. If there's a very demanding or very important task coming up, you might even use some paper, you might write some things down as well. I myself have an online journal which I write in for things that are very deep, very important for me. And I've seen leaders do this before they start a new project, before they do a meeting. They're writing down, they're noting down, they're preparing for that meeting by thinking deeply. What is the purpose? What are we trying to get out of this? And then afterwards, they reflect, they think about how it could have been better. But we also need to reflect on our life as well. What is our purpose? It's so easy for us to get stuck into a routine that we forget why we're doing what we're doing. If I'm working and tiring myself out to the bone to produce the best lesson, or to get through all of the content in my class, so they can meet all the syllabus outcomes and all of that. But then if my lessons themselves are, just next, and it makes the lesson is very boring or very demanding or very tiring for the student, then what I've done as a teacher, I've made that student hate that subject. And sometimes I've caused for that student irrevocable damage to the point where, they're 30, 40 years old, and then a young chemistry teacher comes up to them and he said, oh, I teach chemistry. And they're like, oh, chemistry was my worst subject. I hated it. Somewhere along the line, a teacher made this student hate chemistry or hate that subject because they weren't focused on what their purpose is. And the purpose is to inspire the students to find a path that works for them. And this links back to opening doors, because if you think deeply about things, if you really consider, okay, what do I need to do? Then in that vacuum of need that we have, those doors that are open, people will come and people will help you feel that need and they will support you when you need it. And I've seen that time and time again with others, and I've seen it in my own life as well. And I'm not saying, reflect once a month or something like that. I'm really saying every day, sometimes multiple times a day. It will help us settle. It will help us, really have drive and have motivation to keep us going. And then the last principle before I finish off is to not be very, very wishy-washy. Anyone that, and this kind of links to the whole thing, in that all great leaders have their principles straight, and their principles are solid and they're reliable. They're not all over the place, and they're not just from some Instagram story or something like that. They're really deeply grounded in evidence and well researched. My own principles come from my faith, and not everyone that I've gained inspiration from is religious or faithful, but they all have some core principles that they do follow. But the principles that I have, they're grounded and they're firm in my faith, because I know that according to myself, my faith is what connects me from to the one who's created everything around me, and he is the one that can provide me with that solid foundation. And it is that faith, that strong foundation, that allows me to find peace and strength, that allows me to go out and not worry about trying to form a relationship and failing, or trying to open doors, because in the end, opening doors is something that is good. It's what allows me to make myself vulnerable and to try and fly, because I know that in the end, my safety net is not anyone or anything. It is the one that is in control of everything around me. And finally, when I'm able to reflect, the one that is there when I reflect is him. And from that, I'm able to gain guidance and I'm able to gain inspiration as well. So that really sums up and concludes some of the principles that I wanted to talk about. There are heaps, and when I was writing them down, I had to really pick some that link up and that work really well. And in some of the principles that I've talked about, there are some sub-principles as well that we can also talk about. I've been a bit of a bad scientist and I haven't cited my sources very well. And what we should remember is that a lot of these things that I've said, they're common sense and we kind of already know them already. But we need to understand the distinction between knowing and applying. They're not the same thing. To just recognize, okay, that person is a great leader is one thing. But then to be able to see, okay, these are the things that that great leader or that person is doing. How can I put it into my life is really what we want to be doing. And we have, as Shule Amity graduates, been exposed to some great individuals, and we can think about them, from our teachers, from some of our, of our friends that were at school as well. There's so many things that we can learn from them, and we should not dismiss them. We should try and seek those and try and really build ourselves up so that we can as a community rise, not just each individual rise by themselves. So those who rise, they pull others up as well by giving that example. And if we open doors, we can do that. So just to sum up, we always want to try and open doors. We don't want to be afraid to fall. And we want to think deeply and regularly. And we want to be living by our principles. I hope this proved to be beneficial. And if I said anything wrong, I'd ask that you forgive me as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having your time here, and it was really beneficial, all the points you pointed out. I also want to ask the audience, if you guys have any questions, feel free to put it in the boxes below in the comments and we can share them. I have a few questions with me as well at the moment, and hopefully in the next 10 minutes we can try to answer these questions. So one of the questions is, from your experience as well, since you're heavily involved with the youth, from your observations and experiences as well, what are some struggles of the youth to pursue this confidence in actively seeking leadership and all these different opportunities?
I think it's really what I've seen with many of the youth is that they lack a bit of purpose. They don't really know where they want to be. And I know we can think about when we were back at their age, and we can think, okay, we didn't really have purpose. We didn't really know where we wanted to go. But the thing is, especially with us, I guess we were put out, or I think the limitation that they have is that they're not trying things or being exposed to different things all around them for them to be able to see what they can follow. Because they're sometimes stuck in their own worlds and they're not being exposed to the world around them. And this is, of course, general ideas that I've seen. Not all youth are like this. It's hard for them to find inspiration from the world around them. And that really makes it a big responsibility for us as their role models, or to be their role models, so that we can inspire them and show them these are the things that you can do. We can shine a light in them to show them you are valuable in this way. Because a lot of youth don't see value in themselves, which is sometimes very sad. And because they don't see value in themselves, they're not able to, or they're not confident enough to put themselves out there to try new things. And because they're not putting themselves out there to try new things, they're not able to form those strong relationships that are really important as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's what I think they really lack. Yeah.
Then going across many of the youth sometimes not having confidence in themselves, then how would you say, even how do we confidently accept and embrace our weaknesses in a sense? How do we ensure that we turn self-evaluation to a healthy habit rather than going into a unhealthy form of self-criticism that can stop them rather than reaching out into self-development?
That's right. We really need safe spaces for youth in which they're able to express themselves and they're able to think deeply out loud first. Because if they don't have that practice of thinking out loud and having someone process and having someone help them work through what their emotions are, then once they start to reflect and think deeply within themselves and they think about some of the mistakes they might have made or even small, then it really becomes, it can become a negative spiral in which they start thinking, oh, I did this wrong. I'm not good enough to be able to achieve the things that I want to do if they do have purpose. I actually had a student yesterday who made a mistake, and they came up to me and they were very, very upset. They said, how could I have done this? I feel like, I'm not doing what I need to be doing. And they even went to a few teachers. They started crying and they felt very, very upset. I guess for that student, the idea that they're able to go to someone to talk about that is a very important step, that they see some support in their role models. And it is so important, again, then for us, to us to create these safe spaces in which our youth can come to us by building those relationships with them, in which they can come to us and they can talk about what their needs are and to help them really break it down. And which is why it's very important for us to be also properly equipped to be able to deal with these kind of things as well. I think maybe we lack the equipment to be able to help them process their emotions as well. And mental health first aid training, and communication skills training is important for that.
Yeah, definitely. There are always different areas that we can try to improve on, hopefully. Then another question is going to the area of role models that you mentioned, then what do you suggest, or even from your experiences of choosing your role models, what are some characteristics, good characteristics that you'd recommend that is worthy of being someone's role model in a sense, or even choosing your role models? Because there's a huge variety of different people out there in different areas of success, I guess. So, yeah, what are your thoughts about that?
I think any good role model is the main thing, the most important thing for them is to not be hypocritical. Is that what they say and what they do should align? And if what they do doesn't align with what they say, they recognize that and they make that clear. Children have, or youth have, a very amazing ability to recognize hypocrisy, because they sometimes they can see it within themselves, because youth themselves are very transparent. So when they see someone that isn't being transparent, it really affects them. So for us, it's really about living the way that we the way that we preach. And there's a saying, I think, um, by Imam al-Ghazali, in which he says, advise yourself first before you advise others. And if your heart is not able to if your heart is not able to be affected by the advice that you give yourself, then you should not be advising someone else. And that's really about that thinking deeply first, working on ourselves first, so that the care that we give for our youth can be genuine and can be valuable. And I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, definitely. Really good points that you mentioned. I guess final question as well. Um, so especially with this deep connection forming and this kind of purposeful relationship with each other, how would you say are some barriers or is some challenges in trying to form these deep connections, or even, steps in trying to form these deep connections, especially during COVID times as well, where we're very isolated too? So, what are your personal thoughts on building relationships and some of the barriers in these purposeful relationships?
Yeah. So if I talk about the book by Stephen Mansfield, it is kind of, I don't want to make it sound like social engineering, like there's steps to be able to build strong connections. But these things, they work, and if they're genuine, if you're genuine in how you do them, they can really help you form very strong relationships. And there's really 5 principles that he talks about in his book. He says that to start off a deep relationship, you need to form an indirect connection first. So have an activity that you work on with someone else, or a common goal that you both have. So that might be, fixing something, or working on a project together, or even going out hiking together, or doing some activity together. That's the first one. The second one is expressing honor, and that is recognizing the skills and the talents that others have. So that's really going to someone and saying, "Oh, I think the way you speak is really, really good. How could I be like that?" Or, say, "Oh, that relationship that you have, with your friend, that's a really good relationship." And this requires a lot of humility. It's sometimes a bit hard, because you need to be able to recognize something good in someone else and try and put yourself below them to be able to help raise them up. The third one is a covenant transition, and that is making a deal that you're to help each other in some way. So it might be, you meet with someone and then you're like, okay, I'm going to help you lose weight, for example. I'm going to help you, become a better father, or I'm going to help you work on this thing that you need work on. Make a deal and making it really like set in stone, shaking hands on it, and really working on that together. And to be able to, as a function of that covenant transition, there's the next one, which is a free fire zone, which means that both parties become completely open for criticism. That if someone tells me that that's uh, the way you dealt with that situation is not the best, then I'm like, okay, I really respect what you're saying. I want to work on it. How do you think I can work on it? And the last one, and this is the most important one, but doesn't work unless you have the first four, is creating a contagious culture. And that is an environment in which you really enjoy each other's company and you really feel like you want to be together. And what this does, and what we see in examples of great communities in the past, is that they create a contagious culture in which everyone wants to be part of it. Everyone is trying to join, and they see, okay, these two people have such a great relationship. They really care about each other. They really love each other. And then they want to be part of that as well. They want to form the same connections. And then from that culture, you're able to really grow, and we're able to create environments in which we can help each other grow, but then create spaces in which our youth can grow as well, because our youth see that their elders, that their people that they look up to have strong relationships, and they want to have strong relationships as well. And they think, because in the end, the main thing that everyone wants is a deep relationship. They want to feel like they're connected to someone. So then they see their elders that they have a very, very deep relationship. They're like, okay, I want to have this deep relationship. How can I learn about it from these people? And that culture really is a virtuous cycle, and it helps all of the community grow together, I think.
Yeah, those points are really, really good and interesting. We are up to the limit of the time, but it was really, really good so far. Really relevant points as well related to our society and today's generation as well. Thank you so much for your time. Hopefully, it'll be awesome to even have you again to, go further upon these points. But once again, thank you so much for taking out your time, and thank you to all the attendees who took out their time to also listen to this.
Thank you very much, and I hope this proved beneficial for everyone, and I hope you have a great evening.